Mechanical keyboards are known to be premium and expensive for most of the time, but it doesn't need to be that way with these cheaper budget options. So today we're going to check out a cool budget mechanical keyboard that is very affordable, and this is the Velocifire VM01. The box is nearly all plain, so nothing to see here, and opening up the box we have the keyboard itself wrapped in foam, a quick start guide, and a red plastic keycap puller. And my first impressions is that it feels quite reasonable without being great, as it still has a bit of heft but not too much flex. It also looks relatively good. This is all relative to the price, and this keyboard is one of the better looking full-size budget mechanical keyboards out there. The shape of it is quite simple, which is rectangular for the most part, but then it tapers out around the edges, especially at the front, which is at about 45 degrees, which I don't know, but it kind of gives it a military look, but that just may be me. It does make it slightly larger though, but not large enough that it's supposed to be some kind of support for your wrist, so no, it doesn't impact on comfortability. The black plastic finish is my preferred finish, just a nice and simple satin finish with a very slight texture to it, so there's no issues with fingerprints or anything. There's a logo between the nav cluster and the arrow keys, which I'm never a fan of, but at least it's not glossy or shiny like on other keyboards. And then the look of the keycaps are also actually alright. The texture of the keycaps is very similar to the case itself, and the typeface or font is a very common look, which again I'm not a big fan of, but the font looks a bit more rounded and tame than others, and they're also quite small, so overall much better than other budget boards with this kind of font. On the back there's nothing but the non-removable USB cable, and on the bottom is an angular design with 5 rubber feet. And interestingly, there are no flip-up feet, which is quite a disappointment. The angle of the board is quite flat already, and is actually just about the same as most keyboards without the flip-up feet out, so it's not even in the middle or anything. As said before, this is a full-size keyboard with 104 keys, and has a completely standard ANSI layout. So keycaps are all standard sized and can easily be replaced if you wanted to. Plugging in the keyboard we have the lights, which is another nice feature. It's nice to have a singular color scheme that isn't a fixed rainbow or something, and the color in my own tastes is nearly perfect, as it's quite close to white but is a very light blue, which is different to their mentioned greenish color. So it's not as aggressive as say a darker color that's commonly seen like solid red, blue or green, etc. The brightness has 3 levels, which is controlled via the function key and the arrow keys. Function and scroll lock changes the lighting effects, which is limited, but that's completely fine by me since I don't really use the other modes. And then the left and right arrow keys control the speed of the effect. Taking off the keycaps, they're actually quite nice. They're double shot, so the character that is clear plastic is a different piece of plastic to the black. So they'll never fade away, which is a huge step up from keycaps that are just painted black and laser etched like seen on popular keyboards from Razer, Logitech and Corsair. The clear plastic also extends all the way to the bottom, making the keycap a quite reasonable thickness. Now this keyboard only comes in one switch, which is also a bit of a letdown since there's no other choice, but these use Zorro Brown switches, which are clones of the Cherry MX switches. I've used Zorro Blacks before on the Ajaz AK33 and I found them to be quite nice, but just a touch inconsistent as expected. And these browns just mimic the characteristics of the Cherry MX browns, so they have a medium weight at about 40 to 50 grams and a tactile bump at 2mm, which is halfway, and there's no audible click. The tactile bump is very weak though, and is much weaker than Cherry MX Browns, which already isn't that tactile. So they kind of feel like a very grainy, sandy linear switch. I also felt the spring quite a bit more, which kind of feels unique, but came off as a bit cheap feeling and hollow, and then a bit more cushiony at the bottom because of that spring. But they may be to your liking since they are a bit softer feeling. And here's a quick sound test. Taking the keyboard apart did take me a while, and also don't use a metal ruler like me since it can potentially damage the casing. We have the plastic top shell, which isn't the most sturdy plastic, but because of the angular design it makes it more stronger. And then on the bottom shell there's pretty much no ribbing on the bottom surface for reinforcement, but again because of the angular designs and all the cuts it's reinforced by that and makes it quite strong. The metal backplate is painted black and is steel and is about 1.5mm thick, which is pretty standard for mechanical keyboards. The PCB looks quite clean as well with no glaring issues. We also have the diodes for each switch, and yes, it does feature full N key rollover. So what it comes down to is value. Not everyone can afford an expensive mechanical keyboard, and it doesn't make sense to a lot of people to spend a ton of money when you can just buy a cheap one that does the same thing. But what Velocifire have done is pretty much make mechanical keyboards accessible to a wider range of people since it comes in at about only $35. However, this does reflect on the quality of the keyboard. I feel that the switches aren't the best feeling. They feel quite cheap, springy and hollow, and the switches are one of the most important factors in feel. But on the flip side, the build is absolutely fine. The plastic shell isn't special or anything, but it still has the metal backplate, giving it some heft and durability. And I think the design is also quite nice, taking into consideration how other cheap budget mechanical keyboards look like, especially the full-size ones. I mean, the shell is a touch out there, but the lines are still clean. The font is a toned down version of the Gamery font, and it actually has a quite decent looking backlight. And altogether, it makes for a pretty minimal look, which perhaps may be suitable for an office. So overall, I think it all comes down to the switches, which is probably the only real potential downside of the board. They're still mechanical and will still give you that mechanical experience, which is still above how a membrane keyboard feels like. So if you're on a tight budget, then there's not many other companies out there that will offer a mechanical keyboard cheaper than this.